Every time the 1975 drops a new album, it never ceases to amaze the production community. I hear everybody talking about it. We get a ton of requests to either break down specific songs or make something in the style or break down some of the production and mixing elements. So what we're going to do in this video today is we're going to break down 5 production techniques that I heard throughout the entire album being funny in a foreign language. And I'm going to show you how to recreate those, what they're doing, why they're using these certain techniques and elements, and kind of how they're enhancing the song and the arrangement. So we're going to look at 5 specific techniques. This is not going to break down how to make a 1975 style song. If you do want to see a full video on that, that could be its own separate video. Let us know in the comments below and we can do that in the next couple weeks. But let's hop into Cubase and check out 5 production techniques the 1975 used on their new album, Being Funny in a Foreign Language. But before we do hop in there, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Austin. You're watching Make Pop Music. We have weekly tutorials on here based around music and music production. If you like this video and you want to see more, make sure you check out all of the videos on our channel because we have a ton, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe because that helps us out a ton. And then after the video, if you want to support the channel, you can head over to our website, makepopmusic.com, where you can check out all of our sample packs, preset packs, choruses. We've got a podcast, and we have a bunch of free content that you can download on there at absolutely no cost. So check all that out after the video, but let's hop into Cubase so I can go ahead and start breaking down these techniques. The first technique that I want to talk about is something that I don't highlight enough on this channel, but it is something that we've mentioned, and that is using the entire stereo spread to really enhance your arrangement. And what I mean is we've talked a lot about spreading things out like vocals or like guitars, where you double track things and you triple track things and you pan them out, but you're doing the same thing on both sides. It's really nice for creating some width, but the 1975 kind of took that a step farther, and I noticed it in a lot of their arrangements. You can kind of hear it in their intro, the 1975, you can hear it in I'm in Love with You, and you can hear it in part of the band. What they're doing is they're splitting kind of their lead, either guitar or piano, or they have like some violins and cellos. And what they're doing is they're splitting that piece left and right. So they've got something happening on the left ear, but they're using something totally different on the right ear. And what they're doing is they're taking up that stereo spectrum because they're using the left and the right. But since there are 2 completely different things happening, sometimes they're different textures, sometimes they're doing different melodies, sometimes they have different rhythms. It's kind of creating this really big, wide, super ambient arrangement that you just don't get if you're kind of just duplicating things and spreading them out left and right. I'm always going to be a fan of like triple tracking vocals or layering double guitars and spreading them out, but listen to how different this sounds. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you, we've kind of done an intro right here where we have a guitar on the left doing one thing and we have a guitar on the right doing something completely different. And listen to how that spreads out the stereo arrangement, because now we have 2 identifiable things happening in different areas. So we've got that on the left, and then we've got this on the right. So when you're using this technique and arrangement, it really helps if you're doing things kind of in a slightly different register, or if you have a melody that's just kind of ping-ponging back and forth. So if you did something like, I think they used the cellos in part of the band, that's really just one thing that kind of bounces back and forth. But if you're really trying to kind of layer different textures and different elements, having something that sits lower in the register, like this left guitar, and then having that sits a little bit higher is going to do something where it kind of creates, it's almost like this imbalance in the stereo field. And that is what makes listeners feel like things are wider, feel like things are a little bit more ambient, and feel like things are a little bit more special. Hear how these sound when they're put together. And these are both spread 100% left and 100% right. So soft guitar left is 100 left, soft guitar right is 100% right. But what that's doing is that kind of gives us this really cool wide stereo field where if these were both in the middle, let me show you what this sounds like. It's not really going to have the spread. And they also do this with things like little plucky melodies. So I've kind of highlighted that over here. And so we have one that's panned 68% right and one that's panned 64% left. And this is a really cool example of how they use a lot of call and response and split their elements left and right. So these are kind of 2 similar guitars. They're in slightly different areas of the scale, but they're using pretty similar kind of techniques. And when you can do that, when you can have 2 things that work really well together, but you're kind of not making them the exact same thing, again, it just adds a little bit of that variation. Variation really is what causes the perception of width and of depth. And if you can use different melodic elements or different textural elements, and you can let them sit in their own space, I find that that's going to give you a lot of extra kind of depth. And that's something that you hear all over this 1975 album. Let me show you what this sounds like in context with some drums. I'll mute the vocals for now, though. This is a technique they've been using since their first album. It's heard all over Girls and Chocolate, and they really continued it to this new album. So when you're doing your productions, find elements that you can split left and split right. Not everything needs to be a copy or needs to play the exact same melody or needs to be doing the exact same thing on both sides. Take those liberties with your spatial awareness. Let's go on to the second production technique that they used. And I think that this is a really cool thing. I've heard it used in a couple pop songs, and it's creating this chordal effect with electric guitar. So you can hear it at the end of their intro, the 1975. There's this guitar that has this weird, it sounds chorusy, but it's kind of playing multi-voices. Here's the guitar DI that I tracked. It's literally just one note. Literally just a Strat playing one note. But what we're going to do is I'm using the Archetype 10 Henson amp because it has a multi-voicer in it. You could also use something like Harmony Engine from Antares. I used it before on a guitar, and it sounds really, really cool. Kanye West has done this effect in the past. It's just kind of a really cool thing that you can use to give your guitar a little bit of depth. So what we're going to do, here's a tone without the multi-voicer. It's just kind of a distorted, lead guitar tone. It's not really doing anything too gnarly. But what you can do is you can engage a multi-voicer or something like a Harmony Engine, or you could probably even do this with a vocoder. And what we're doing is we're adding different voices. So we're adding voice 1, that's taking it a 4th down. We're taking it an 8th up, so that's just going to be an octave in voice 2. We're taking it a 5th up in voice 3, and we're taking it an 8th down, so an octave down in voice 4. And you can see right here, here are the levels and the panning. So this is panned all the way to the left. This is panned about 50%. This is panned about 50% to the right, and then all the way to the right. And you can kind of just balance out the things like volume and kind of where you want everything to sit. And then we've got the DI that's going to be right in the middle. So what I've done is I've selected the key of the song. We're in A major, and you can select a chord. I didn't. I wanted to kind of pop in these intervals naturally because we're playing a moving progression. But listen to how adding these different voices with something like a multi-voicer or a Harmony Engine kind of really enhances this guitar and makes it a really special element. It's just got this really gnarly texture that you're not going to get from other things. Let me show you inside of the actual song. Let me make this a little bit smaller. And here's how it sounds when it's actually playing in the song. Here's it with the multi-voicer. Here's it if we turn that multi-voicer off and I just have that kind of standard 1980s distorted kind of lead guitar solo. It's fine, but it's a little bit boring and it doesn't really have width and it doesn't have texture. Where if we turn this on, we're getting a lot of different kind of ambience. And when I heard that chordal guitar effect at the end of 1975, it got me a little bit pumped. I love guitars like this. I think that too many people use guitars as kind of a solo element, and they don't necessarily stack things like harmony, or they don't make guitars full arrangements. And I find that this is a really cool way that you can do this really quickly. You can even play in MIDI if you want to do that, so similar to a vocoder. But that's one thing that you could be doing with your guitars to kind of take them up and make them a little bit more ambient. You could turn this into a pad. You could turn this into something like a big chord that's going to sustain. And yeah, you're going to get this really cool, unique effect inside of your actual production. So definitely try that one out on your next production. Let's go ahead to the third technique that they used in this album, and it's something that most of the people watching are probably going to think is insane because it's something that you're told not to do. And that is that on a lot of the guitars, they have several songs. I think All I Need to Hear is a really good example of this. They clip the guitar input, so they're probably using a preamp or some kind of like console or something like that, and all they're doing is they're turning that gain way too hot. So you can do this even if you have like a Focusrite interface. You can do this with anything. But let's say that you've already tracked your guitar, and let's say that it wasn't clipping. Let's say you actually gain staged everything right. What you can do is you can take something like an analog modeled preamp. So in Slate Virtual Mix Rack, we have the 73. I actually tracked this through a real 73, so I could have just done this in the input stage, but I wanted to show you guys in the box so you could actually see how to recreate this. And what you're going to do is you're going to create quite a bit of virtual drive because you're going to want this to saturate. So let me show you what this guitar sounds like with nothing on it. It's a really clean, kind of standard Fender Stratocaster plug. Really round, really bubbly, beautiful little tone, but I kind of wanted it to be a little bit more gnarly, and I wanted to recreate that clip DI. They've done this on vocals, they've done this on guitar, they've done this on bass, they've done this with strings that they've mic'd up. And all you need to do is drive a preamp or an interface or something too hard to where it starts saturating. And that's exactly what we're doing right here. So watch this little bulb right here light up red. And you can hear that not only is it saturating and adding that clipping on top, but it kind of adds this nice weird little bit of warmth in the low mids. And it's something that I think if you can use that right in your production, I think that it could help an element actually stand out. So after that, what we ended up doing was we just popped on a pretty standard kind of 80s tone. I just bypassed the amp in the cab because I just wanted the EQ, the stomp pedal, and the choruses. And then other than that, sometimes when you're doing this, you might want something like a transient designer because as you clip things, that transient is going to get insane sounding. So I still wanted it to sound clipped, but I didn't necessarily want it to be so pokey in the mix. So I just drive back that attack. And it's almost like using an overdrive pedal when you do something like clip a DI. So you don't always have to track everything super clean if that's not what you're trying to do in the song. Don't be afraid to drive something a little bit harder and make it sound gnarly and make it sound analog. That's one of the things that they do on a lot of this album, and we're going to talk about that more in a minute. But don't be afraid to clip your DI because it could be a really cool technique to kind of give your guitar a little bit of an edge. You can hear that this really starts to pop out of the mix when we play it with that clipping happening. Versus if we drove this back and we just had it like... It's a cool effect, and it's something that a lot of people probably overlook because they would consider it wrong. So don't be afraid to clip your things if that's something that you want to do for the tone and for the actual aesthetic of the song. Let's get on to the fourth technique. This is going to be a huge one. It's literally all over the album. It's all over every single element on this album, and that is using something like a space echo. So I want to show you what this sounds like on a vocal because if you've never heard a space echo, you might not even be familiar with what it's doing. But for this, we're just using Outer Space by, who's this even by? Audio Thing. I think it's like $49. It sounds fine. It's doing a really cool job. And what a space echo is this is a kind of a vintage unit by Roland, and it's got echo tape heads, and then it's got reverb echoes. And what you can do is you can get this really cool kind of 1980s sounding kind of disheveled echo. It's got things like intensity. It's got things like wow and flutter. It's got things like different tape models. You can even sync it to your project, which we're not doing because I'm kind of using it as a slapback. And listen if I don't have this on. Here's what the vocal sounds like in the mix. It's totally fine. It's just a clean pop vocal. It's just got your standard, auto-tune, EQ, compression, DS, compression, DS. That's it. Here you go without it. It's a fine vocal, but it doesn't sound very 1975-y.
I'm smoking cigarettes in the back of a taxi. I can shake the vision of you undressed in the backseat.
Now let's engage this. And what we're going to do when we engage this is set this to mode 9, because what that's going to do is that's going to give us head number 2 and head number 3, and that's going to allow us to have a little bit of this reverb in there. So if you do these are only going to be echo. You're not going to have this reverb module up here engaged at all. And if you drag it all the way down here, that's going to be reverb only, so you won't have this echo module down here. But what we want is we want this kind of short, dark, kind of roomy reverb. As you can see that we're boosting the treble a little bit. And then we want this really, really short, so 115 millisecond and 175 millisecond kind of slapback delay. We have this on stereo, so it's going to spread it out. And we do have the echo engaged, and this is not on wet only because we're using it as an insert. Echo volume's at 28%, reverb volume is at 5%. Let's hear how this is affecting the sound.
I'm smoking cigarettes in the back of a taxi. Can shake the vision of you undressed in the backseat, yeah. I see your silhouette every time I go to sleep.
You can instantly hear that it's taking you into that 1975 kind of Tame Impala, Black Keys, really weird indie pop vocal that you hear all the time. And if you're not knowing how to recreate it, a space echo is a really easy and quick way to do it. Mess around with some of the reverb modes, mess around with the echo modes, kind of find your balance of what you want. Most of them will come with some pretty good presets, but this is a really simple preset that I just made up myself. I kind of started here and then changed pretty much everything. And these are the settings. So if you have this, or if you have any other space echo, whether that's the Roland, the Outer Space, the Arturia one, you should be able to copy most of these settings and you should be able to get a really similar vibe. And let's hear what this sounds like now in the mix. You're going to hear this instantly sounds like a 1975 vocal.
I'm smoking cigarettes in the back of a taxi. Can shake the vision of you undressed in the backseat, yeah.
I even used it a little bit on the guitar up here that we already talked about, but you can see it's the last thing as an insert. Space echoes in particular are going to give everything this kind of like metallic-y, slapbacky, roomy, really vintage sound. And if you don't have a space echo plugin, it is one that I suggest picking up. You could probably even copy this with something like Comeback Kid by Baby Audio, or some of the Valhalla delays, or even Repeater. But I just find that the kind of familiarity of a space echo in the specific sound lends itself really well to this kind of like 1980s inspired indie pop. The fifth tip I want to talk about on this is how they actually recorded everything, because it plays hugely into the sound of the album. They did a podcast with Tape Notes, and they talked a lot about their production techniques. So if you want to go listen to that, I highly suggest it. I will put a link in the description. No affiliation, but it's a really cool listen. And on that, they talked about using only analog gear. So only analog synths, only analog consoles, preamps, compressors. The only thing that they really did in the box was like creative effects that you really can't modulate outside of that. But with that comes this insane amount of warmth and depth, and it can be really hard to kind of mimic that inside the box. But you can be really particular with certain plugins that you use that can do a really good job of emulating that. So even if you don't have much analog gear, this is something that you can do that will take everything a step further. First one I want to talk about is using something like vintage tape. They recorded everything on this album to tape, or they at least mixed through tape in the final process. And this is going to add quite a bit of low end and low mid and warmth. And what it's going to do is it's going to roll off some of that top end. So you're not going to get that overly bright, overly sibilant, kind of in your face modern pop mix, but you are going to get something that feels a little bit more warm and a little bit more intimate. So I'm going to show you on a drum bus so you can hear what it sounds like. And then I'm going to show you on the entire mix. Hear how it kind of tucks those hi-hats into a more lively place. It kind of softens up that snare a little bit. That kick gets a little bit fluffier. Here are my settings if you want to copy them. I just have the bias at high. I'm on the 2-inch 16 track, and I'm on the 456. And then I've got a couple settings down here. You can mess with things like wow and flutter, bass alignment, noise reduction. That's all totally fine. This is a really cool plugin by Slate Digital. It comes in their all access bundle, and I use it all the time. And then on top of using something like a tape machine, you can also use something like a virtual console. So let me go in here, and I'm going to show you how this actually works. So we're on the bass, and we do have a virtual tape machine, but before we're hitting that, there's a really, really cool plugin in Virtual Mix Rack called the Virtual Channel Strip. And what that's going to do is you can kind of emulate if you're going to run this through an analog board. So they have a Brit 4K, a Brit 4KG, they have a USAA, they have a Brit N, and these are all modeled after different boards. So SSLs, Neves, SSL 4K. It's just a really cool way to kind of add some warmth. So I'm driving the drive of this up a little bit, and then the input and output are linked. So you can kind of just modulate that depending on how much gain or how much saturation and warmth you want. So let me show you. So you could even use this for that clipping effect that we talked about in tip number 3. But what this is going to do is it just kind of softens everything up, adds a little bit of that analog feel. Listen to this bass without all of this. This is just a Trillion bass. It's really digital sounding. So here's with the console and the tape machine turned off.
Cigarettes in the back of a taxi. Shake the vision of you undressed in the backseat. I see a silhouette every time I go to sleep.
It just does a really good job of making that bass feel a bit more lively and a bit more analog. And you can use it on as many things as you possibly want. Here's another example of tape saturation where I'm using tape to do something like saturate. We're just using Tape by Baby Audio. This is a really, really cool way that you can add, again, a bit of that warmth and a little bit of that saturation like we talked about in tip number 3 with that clip DI. But listen to how much extra tone and texture this gives us.
Silhouette every time I go to sleep.
So make sure that when you're going through your mix, if things are sounding a little bit stale or one-dimensional or a little bit boring, play around with using things like tape emulations, play around with using things like console emulations, analog style plugins, because those are going to have these little small kind of discrepancies in them, even in their coding, that might do something a little bit different than, you know, Pro C or Pro Q, things that are designed to be really clean, really transparent, and really conducive to modern production. maybe stray away from those when you're doing things like this. Use things like the Neve style EQ or the Neve style tape console or the Kramer tape emulation, because doing that is going to give you that extra 5 or 10%. So when you get to your mixing, you're going to more so think, all right, now I just need to tame this a little bit and I need to kind of just get this at the right level, but you're not trying to add all of this warmth at a super late stage. So bake that into your production process just like you would if you were just tracking a bass through that. So set them up first in your chain and make sure I'm just going to commit to this. It's going to go through this console or it's going to go through this tape emulation. And then I'm going to hit everything after that according to if I actually ran it through that. Just a really cool thing that you can do to kind of take your productions one step up. But those are 5 of my favorite tips and tricks and techniques that I heard in the new 1975 album. There are a whole bunch more. And if you want to see us really dive in and make an entire project in the style of the 1975, let us know in the comments below, because we can basically just expand on this project and I can give you guys a full 1975 run through where I show you everything from drum tones to guitar tones to vocal chains. So let us know if you want to see that. But other than that, if you like this video, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. If you want to support the channel, head over to our website, makepopmusic.com, where you can check out sample packs, preset packs, courses, our podcast, and you can download a bunch of the freebies so you can get stuff for yourself. And then other than that, let us know what you want to see in the next videos in the comments down below. But that's going to do it for this week. We'll see you guys next week with much more content. Much love. Peace.